What is happening, everyone? Welcome back to another video, and today I'll be showing you how to do a solder-free sound reactive LED mod for all PSP models. And yes, that includes the PSP GO and PSP Street, so without further ado, let's get right into it. So yeah, this has been a video that I've been teasing for quite a while now, and it's finally here. So let me go ahead and quickly explain how the sound reactive LEDs work, followed by my cheap and easy to do method. And for those who don't know much about it already, basically all it is at its core is an LED connected to the speaker wire connections, and that's it. And since we're using very small LEDs, it takes very little to power them, which when the power is fluctuating as the speaker is playing something, not only the LEDs will react accordingly, but also be very responsive, as there's no delay when the speaker is doing something, and the LED having to react. You would know what I'm talking about if you ever owned an RGB LED controller that has a sound function, which is usually super delayed. Now the first time I did this mod was back in 2008, I was just entering high school, and basically it took me 3 days to solder 2 wires onto 2 small LEDs. How small? I'm talking this small. Yeah. So imagine having a terrible soldering iron, no flux, which makes solder flow easier to the connections that you want, doing it without any tools. All I had was some electrical tape and some cheap solder. It took forever, but in the end, it was totally worth it for me at the time, as I thought it was the coolest thing ever. So yeah, here I am about 16 years later, doing the same mod once again, except this time, I'm showing you guys how to do it without all the hard work. So for that, we are using pre-soldered LEDs. And trust me, I wished I had these back in the day. $2.50 for 10 pieces of soldered LEDs with nice long thin wires. These are originally used for models, you know, all that fun stuff. But it's absolutely awesome to see these things exist and be readily available. So you guys are going to have a fun time picking the colors that you want, where you want to put them, how many you want to put. It's all going to be a pretty easy process for most of the models. And we'll talk about the compatibility right about now. So let's start off with the easiest models to do, and that would be these slim models. And the reason is, the speakers don't have any wires running into them. Instead, they connect using these 2 springy legs that make contact with these 2 terminals on the motherboard. The other one on the left is basically the same thing. Then you got the E1000 that also shares the same connections, and the same goes for the PSP GO. And I would say it's also one of the easier ones to do, as it involves a bit less risk than the next one, that being the 1000 model. And again, the difficulty level here is only because we're doing it in a solder-free method, so it's more accessible to you guys. Otherwise, if you know how to solder, then your life will be a whole lot easier, especially with the 1000 model. So why is it harder with this one? Well, if you have ever taken apart a 1000 model, you'll know that the speakers use wires. These wires are tiny, they're not exposed, and these speaker connection points are soldered on, so there's no easy way to actually connect directly into them without having to do any soldering. And after a bunch of experimentation, trying to see if I can connect directly into them, which I could for the left side, but not so much for the right side, as the wire is soldered the other way, so there's no way to actually anchor myself into it, like I'm doing with this one, which could definitely work by the way. Unfortunately, I had to fall back to my more intrusive method, which involves creating a gap in the insulation without damaging the cable, which then will allow me to tap into it by twisting a wire around it, covering it with some insulation, and calling it a day. So unfortunately, if you want to do this solder-free with the 1000 model, it can be a bit risky. So if you still want to proceed, here's my method. First, you want to get yourself a very sharp razor blade, and that's very important as you want to have full control. At the same time, you don't want to brute force it with a dull blade, because if you do brute force it, you're going to rip the cable, and there's a good chance that you'll damage the internal connections as well. And basically how you want to do it is lay it flat on a table and just slightly wiggle it. Don't slice, just lay it on top and wiggle it until you can feel something different. Then rotate it, do the same thing, and then inspect it with your own eyes and see if you have made a round circle around the entire section that you're trying to cut. Once you're done with that, you can go ahead and grab your fingernails and try to create a gap between the 2 connections. And once you have successfully created a gap, go ahead and grab one end of the LED, bend it onto itself like so, and then simply hook it on top and twist it to form a solid connection. Then go ahead and grab some Kapton tape, or any type of thin tape that you have, cut a small piece, lay it on top, and fold it over itself. And that's one way of connecting the LEDs. The other way could be considered as plan B if this method fails. Or you can just skip this method and jump to the second method, which is completely cutting the wire. You want to do it somewhere in the middle where you have enough room to work with and enough wire to actually expose. And the reason is, since the included wires to these LEDs are pretty long, we're never actually going to be using all of it. During the next step of choosing where you want to put the LED, you're going to end up trimming quite a lot of this wire, which means we can actually use it to recover and / perform the second method. Now if you're finding the tip of the wire is kind of frayed and not very clean, it's best to actually cut from it to ensure that you have a clean start. So what you want to do now is expose about a centimeter worth of wire. Now as for how you do that, well, personally I use my teeth. I've been doing it for many years. You can use a wire stripper, or you can try your luck with the scissors and slightly weaken the insulation until you can pull it out. That is something you have to figure out for yourself, because not everyone is going to have the exact same tools and methods to actually perform this. But it's a very simple thing. So now what you want to do with your extra wire is to go ahead and cut about 2 inches. So go ahead and expose both ends. Something like this should do. And do the same thing for the speaker wire. And if the wire looks frayed, you can go ahead and twist it until it's a perfectly straight and easy to manage wire. Now what you want to do is to go ahead and combine both of these cables, twist them together. And for the other side, you want to grab the LED cable, as well as the other end of the speaker wire, and combine all 3 by twisting them. And now if we take a look, we have the LED cable right over here. We have the cable that we have inserted between the original cable, and the 2 connections right over here, which of course we want to go ahead and insulate like before. And again, lay it flat like so, and tape them up. Then you want to go ahead and do that for the other end, and that's how you can connect one cable to one side of the speakers. And we wire any LEDs on the right to it, and likewise with the left, any left LEDs wire to the left speaker. And that's pretty much it. The only thing you gotta really worry about is where your wires are going, as this metal piece can actually cut your wires if you're not careful. And don't forget, you got 9 other LEDs that you can pull wires from, so there is a backup plan. Speaking of planning, you want to actually go ahead and plan out how you're going to connect the LEDs, especially with the 1000 models. First, of course, you want to make sure you're not going through any screw holes, but with the 1000 models specifically, you want to be careful of the subframe. The first time I did this for the triggers on the 1000 model, what ended up happening is the frame cut right through these thin wires. And I had to go ahead and redo the process a couple more times until I was like, you know what, let me just take the long path and route it around the edges and find a path that does not interfere with the frame until I got to the speakers. In this case, since you are doing it solder free, the best place to tap into the right speaker would have to be around right here. There's plenty of space, so you can definitely have some leeway to work with. As for the right side, somewhere around here, and then you're gonna have to figure out where you want to route it. Either you want to go the long way around, or find another path that is free of interference. Now, if you are soldering this, like I did with this model, since the frame is made out of metal, when your speakers are sitting in there, your soldering blob might actually reach and make a connection with the subframe. So what you want to do after you're done is lay a small piece of Kapton tape just to reduce the chance of it shorting. And one last thing regarding the subframe. In my case, since I did solder them, I had to cut a little sliver right here to allow my LED wires to pass through without being crushed by the frame here. And likewise for the other side, it will be a good idea to create a little gap if you are soldering this once again, so you can take the long way around. You can take whatever path you want. You may have a whole lot more LEDs, which we'll talk about later on in this video. But one thing for sure is that you want to plan things out, and not everyone is going to have the exact same setup. I think for most people, if they're going to attempt this, they might just do the LED triggers, which you'll see how it's done on mine in just a bit. And that's pretty much it when it comes to connecting the wires to the 1000 speakers. Yes, it's a bit more involved, but it's definitely doable if you have the patience and tiny motor skills. And that's again the same method you want to use for all the other models, the 2000, 3000, E1000, and PSP GO. You just want to link the cable around the edge of these things. I prefer to have it on the edge right here, and just twist the wire until I get myself a solid connection. And it would be good practice to make sure that the wire is not being exposed too far out, just in case if it accidentally shorts into any of the other components. An alternate way of doing this, you can grab the wire, spin it around, then you can grab your pair of tweezers and wrap it around tightly, like so. And no, there's no tape required for this one. So now that you know the basics, let me go ahead and show you what I've done for my existing ones by ripping them apart, starting with the PSP GO. So for that, here's what I've done to mine. You see the connections are very similar, and then springy legs on the actual speakers. So for these ones, it's a bit tricky, as you gotta work with a very short LED cable to make sure that it fits, and to make sure that it fits right in the middle, so you're not looking at the LED directly, as well as keeping even lighting around the grill here. And the best way to take out the speaker without breaking anything is to push it here, upwards, which should allow it to just pop right out. And as you can see, it's very simple and straightforward. It's pretty hilarious, but you just gotta play around with it until you have it perfectly centered. And the same goes for the speaker wire. Just have enough exposed that you can actually wrap it around and fit it in comfortably. You wanna start off on the left and then push it in. As for the home button LED, as you can see, I have another LED connected to it right on top, and I just brought it all the way right down here, so it can reflect into it and cause it to glow. And if you want a quick tip, if you have a needle or something flat and small, you can try to line up the LED and push it in from the front grill as you're pushing back in the speaker. Again, it's kind of finicky, but definitely doable. So yeah, pretty simple and straightforward for the PSP GO. Now let me show you what I've done to my 2000 model. So I've got 4 LEDs, 2 red on top and 2 blue ones on the bottom. So as you can see, it looks pretty cool, but it does feel like something is missing on the edges right here. I might add purple to kind of give me a combined look, which would blend the colors in between the red and the blue. So with that said, let me go ahead and rip it apart and show you guys how I've routed things. So here it is ripped apart. You can't see much, so let me go ahead and take apart the screen. So let's start off with the right side. Basically, the LED is just sitting right on top right there. It's connected to the speaker, and then I have another LED connected with 2 wires coming right down here. And there's a little crevice right here where the blue LED is sitting. The same thing goes for this one. That one is just sitting right there. It's a bit more finicky as you do have this piece and it can get in the way while you're actually working on it, but a pair of tweezers will help you get through this. Again, the wire is routed right through, around right down there, and then I just have it sitting in a little crevice right there, and that's it. It's pretty straightforward. Now, as for the 1000 model, I've got 6 LEDs placed in very specific places, so let me go ahead and rip it apart, and let me show you what I've done. Alright, here it is. By the way, if you're wondering why there's a bunch of rust here, well, you can watch my last video, which is restoring a rusty PSP. So there's a link in the description if you guys are interested. And we still can't see much, so let me go ahead and take apart the subframe. And here we go. So like I said, I did solder these, and if you were to do it, you want to tap into the wire somewhere around here, as there's less things to get in the way. But let's go ahead and follow the wires and see where things are going. So remember, I got one in the trigger, one in the middle here, and one that you can see right over here. So for this one, like with the PSP GO, you have a small wire that you sandwich right between the speaker and the speaker grill, and you just fit it in, and it's pretty much good to go. As for this one, I added some putty, routed the wire under the face buttons, stuck the LED inside of it to keep it perfectly in place and perfectly lined up with the center of the face buttons. Finally, the last LED is also being routed right behind the face buttons, and this time, it's sitting right inside the triggers, which I'll show you how to do in just a bit. As for the left side, you can see the little wire coming here for the bottom speaker, and the two other wires going around the edge as there's less interference. One going right under here, which I also had to drill a hole through, and finally the last one also going into the trigger. So let me go ahead and show you exactly where to drill, and this applies for all models. First, you want to visually inspect and see where there's actually room for the LED wire to sit. In the case of the 1000, there's a gap right over here where even if you press it all the way down, there's still plenty of room for the wire to sit and freely move. So once you take note of that, you'll know exactly where to drill. In my case, I already know exactly where. It's usually right around here above the tabs, and how I like to do it, to get a Phillips head screwdriver, center it exactly where I want to drill, and then simply press into it until I have a little dimple, just like so. Then I grab my tiny drill and drill just deep enough to where the LED can sit. Now you could drill all the way through and have it poke out more, but it doesn't look all that great. Just about that much is usually enough. However, if you do drill more, it will be easier to actually keep the LED in there while you're gluing it. And if you didn't have a drill, you can just kind of power through it with a screwdriver and just keep it flat on your table and keep going until you have enough room. And once you're done with that, I like to apply a small drop of B7000, followed by sliding the LED right into it and taping it just to keep it in place as it dries. And you want to make sure the LED is facing upwards. If it doesn't, it's not a problem. It will bounce around and reflect anyways. As for this part, it's pretty straightforward. Just drill a small hole right in the center, make sure it's perfectly small, just enough for the LED so it doesn't interfere with the D-pad controls, and then feed the LED right through it. In my case, I also use some B7000 to secure it into place, or you can use whatever else you got on hand. Now this specific one would work perfectly fine with a transparent button, which you've probably seen in my last video, but if you ended up going with solid colors, then you may want to actually go ahead and also drill a small hole right in the center. Make sure it doesn't go beyond the limits of the original hole, because it will throw off the dynamics and the mechanics of the actual D-pad, as it does need to sit down and pivot around that center point, which is something that you thankfully don't have to do for the face buttons. However, if you're doing this for the slim models, it's most likely going to interfere with the function of the D-pad, as the D-pad is quite different, as it has a round bottom, which will pivot right in the center. So if you do drill a hole right here, it might be fine for a transparent D-pad, but if you're going to drill through a solid one, just know of the possible consequences, as I personally haven't tried it yet. But once I do, you'll see a picture of it in the community post, and if you're watching this in the future, you'll know about it in the pinned comments. And finally, let's go ahead and talk about how these LEDs react with different models, as there are some quirks and things that you should definitely know about before starting this project. This right here is my experimental PSP. You'll be seeing it a whole lot in the upcoming mods. Basically, I got the speakers wired externally, because I've got a bunch of other mods I want to experiment with, as well as allowing me to test out various different LED colors and seeing how they react before having to rip apart everything completely. I got another one right here for the 1000 model, but currently only one of the speakers. So for this one, I want you, yes you, to go ahead and grab your PSP, sit in the home screen without anything playing, kind of move it back and forth to activate the speakers, and basically put your ear up to the speakers. With the 2000, 3000, and E1000, there'll be a faint hissing sound, which will only completely disappear if you actually mute the PSP by holding down the music note button. Now if you have a 1000 model, it's way more prominent and the noise is a bit more high-pitched. Sometimes you can hear it when you're playing in bed in a quiet room. You'll hear that noise, and no, you cannot mute that sound when you actually hold down the mute button. That sound only goes away when you have an external audio device connected through the headphone jack. Finally, if you have a PSP GO, it's actually absolutely silent, and the sound only activates when there is something actually playing. Basically, you want to put the volume all the way down to 1%, then put it up to your ear, and then move it back and forth so you can actually listen for it. So at this point, you're probably asking, what's this all about? Well, basically, this self noise that you hear will translate into power. Power that the LED will be pulling, which means, depending on which color you pick. You may have LEDs that are always on, but are very dim until you start playing something and they become very bright. That self-noise that you're hearing will translate in some of the LED colors into being always on even though there's no sound playing. It mostly happens with red LEDs, and sometimes a tiny bit with the blue ones. At least that's the case when it comes to the slim models. When it comes to the 1000 model on the other hand, since it has a ton of self-noise, you'll notice that the lights are a whole lot brighter, and it doesn't matter what color you put, they will all light up whether you have something playing or not. And one quick thing you should know, if you are using red LEDs on a 1000 model, the sound reactivity will actually not be as prominent as the other colors, as the red LEDs in nature require less power to actually activate. Thus, the self-noise of the 1000 model have them constantly on, so they have very little to work with in terms of reactivity. You see there are different sizes for these LEDs, the smallest one usually being 0402. These are the ones that I'm currently using for pretty much all my mods. Then you have 0603, as well as 1206, which you'll probably notice is a whole lot bigger than the small ones. These do require a bit more power to activate, and depending on which color you get, they might be brighter or dimmer. It's all something you're going to have to experiment with. Now, what's the downside of going through these bigger sizes? Well, other than pulling more power, the wires do end up using a thicker gauge, which may make the installation process a bit more tricky if you have a lot of them and not a whole lot of room to work with. And as far as I can tell, the 0603 and the 1206, they both use a very similar, if not the same gauge of wire. So at this point, I finished recording, editing, and reviewing the video a couple more times, and I'm left with a couple questions that you guys are probably going to be asking, so let me go over them in this section. Starting off with speaker effect, once again with the PSP GO, it will have some hissing noise when you're playing something, but it's definitely noticeable. As for the standard models, so far, I haven't encountered anything negative when it comes to sound quality or volume. So you're probably wondering, how much power does this pull? That has been the first question that I've been asked by multiple people when I showed them this mod. And to be honest, for the many years I used my original PSP 2000 with the dual LED trigger mod, back in 2008 to 2009, I never really had any issues with battery life. I was using my PSP just fine, never had an issue, never thought about it, and you shouldn't too, because these LEDs barely pull any power. Don't forget that you already have a power LED right here, and you got two right here for the memory card and the Wi-Fi. Yeah, they may not always be on, but don't forget that you also have an LCD that has an array of LEDs on the bottom that act as a backlight. And we can go ahead and take apart this IPS screen that I bought a long time ago and it was broken in shipping, and try to show you what I'm talking about. So of course we got multiple layers down there. Here we have the LCD, so that's what's doing the blocking of the light and giving you the different colors. And behind that we got multiple different layers to give you a flat, clean, even lighting across the entire panel, which we can see right over here. So that's 1, that's 2, that's 3 and 4, and there's 1/5 one right over here. And if you take a look right down here, we got ourselves 7 LEDs that are going to be a whole lot brighter and consume a whole lot more power than these guys. So that shouldn't be something that you should worry about. And if I was to give myself an uneducated guess on how much battery life I'm losing with 6 LEDs with this one, I would say maybe half an hour, tops. And that's being generous. But we'll know for sure in my battery testing video, and once that video is done, and I'm done testing LED power consumption, I'll leave the information in the pinned comments. But as of right now, battery testing just takes way too damn long, and that's just how it is. Alright, so if you're looking for an on-off button, that is something you're going to have to add yourself. You can buy one of these switches, and yes, also do it solder-free if you really want. Even though I don't recommend it, it's going to be very annoying to do, and every time you want to take apart the console, everything is going to be all over the place, but it's definitely doable solder-free. You can get like a 10-pack for like 50 cents. I'll leave a link for it in the description down below. As for the wire you can use the access wire you have with the other LEDs, so it's definitely something that is doable. However, this video is supposed to be a basic introduction on how to do this mod, especially for beginners, so I didn't want to complicate things. I wanted to keep it as simple as possible, and I think most people are going to keep the LEDs on anyways. They give you really nice ambience, they light up your room, and makes your PSP feel extra special, so why would you turn it off if you put in all that hard work? Unless of course someone is beside you and they're trying to sleep, but at that point, you're most likely going to be plugging in some headphones. As for brightness control, the only thing you can do is lower the volume. It's definitely doable via hardware mods, where you can add a potentiometer, but that's just way too complicated, and I don't think anyone wants to do that. Finally, you have the difference between 0603, 0402, and 1206. The three main different sizes that you can get for these SMDs. Well, in the case of the 0402 and the 0603, I found the brightness levels to be the exact same. The only difference is that the 0603 are slightly bigger, and the wire gauge is slightly thicker, which when compared to the 1206, where it shares the same type of wire, it does however have larger LEDs and do pull more power. And the final tip I can give you to manage these cables is to grab it from the top and simply twist the cable like so. That will turn it into a single twisted cable that is much easier to manage than this. And that's really about it. The only thing I could do now is give you guys a quick sample of all the different colors that I have on hand, running on both the Slim and the 1000 model, and showing you what they look like using my experimental PSPs. Alright, so I got all the colors wired up right here. So we got white, warm white, purple, red, green, blue, and yellow, which looks more like orange. So let's start with the Slim model and see how it looks when it's idle and when it's playing something. Alright, so as you can see, currently we have the PSP on, but there is no LEDs running. That's because the sound driver hasn't activated until we actually do something. So now as you can see, we got some red and a tiny bit of yellow. And if you go ahead and play something, we can see what that kind of looks like. We can go ahead and drop down the volume. That's 0%, that's 1%. And we can see that the yellow is very awake. Now it could be due to the wiring that I've done. It might not be equal, but this should give you a pretty good idea of what the colors look like. I believe we got white over here, purple, red, blue, green, and then we got warm white, and then we got yellow. And once again, if we go ahead and mute the PSP, the LEDs will completely turn off, just like what would happen if you plug in a pair of headphones. And finally, this is what it looks like with the 1000 model. And as you can see, we're playing absolutely nothing. We're just sitting in the home screen and all of the LEDs are almost completely lit up. Which if we go ahead and play something, we can see that it can get pretty damn bright. Finally, if you go ahead and lower down the volume, that is 0%, that is 1%. Somewhere around 30% is when you'll start noticing some reactivity. And if you go ahead and hit the mute button, we can see that the LEDs stay on. And that's one of the reasons that you'll find out in my battery testing video why the 2000 and 3000 models are a bit more power efficient. And that is pretty much it for this video. So I went ahead and added those two LEDs I was talking about, and that thing, it really ties it all together. And really just having ambient lighting like this really improves the overall experience of playing on a PSP. It's extremely easy to do, extremely cheap, and the end result is just super satisfying. As always, if you have any questions, do let me know or find me on Discord. And if you have done this mod, I would love to see it, so make sure you join the Discord server.